Now, the legislature is scheduled to leave Albany for the year in just 2 weeks, and that's usually not a lot of time to tackle big issues like this one. But lawmakers say they're confident that some sort of gun legislation will pass before they're done. For more on that, I spoke this week with State Senator Brian Cavanagh, a Democrat from Manhattan, who actually founded the group American State Legislators for Gun Violence Prevention. Senator Cavanagh, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's start with the state's red flag gun law. That's what it's commonly called, but as you and I both know, it's called extreme risk protection orders. There's something that can be filed with a court to basically take away someone's guns when they are determined to be harm to themselves or to others. Now, in this case, the state is considering expanding that to other instances. Can you go through how that law might be expanded in the wake of the awful shooting in Buffalo?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that we have to do a review of what happened in this case. We know that this particular individual had made some threatening statements at his school last year. We know the school took it seriously and involved law enforcement, and we know there was some sort of, according to media reports, some sort of mental health evaluation. We don't really know what evidence was available at that time. So the first thing is that people need to understand in New York that there is a tool available when people are indicating that they're dangerous, but not even necessarily committing a crime. This is a civil process. You can present evidence to a judge, and if they find it convincing, they can remove any guns the person has and prevent them from acquiring guns, from buying or acquiring them legally. And that did not happen in this process, so we're still trying to sort out why it didn't happen in that case. But law enforcement or schools or district attorneys or family members of somebody who might be a danger to themselves and others can initiate that process. And it is a fairly comprehensive law already. The governor today announced an executive order that will, in some cases, require state police rather than having the discretion whether to seek an extreme risk protection order, to seek one when somebody is showing that kind of evidence. We do know that there's a very wide variability in New York as to who has sought orders in the first 3 years of the effectiveness of the law. There are some counties where there have been a great many and some counties where there have been relatively few.
Now, talk to me about who you think should be the mandatory reporters. Obviously, we'll have the state police now, but should we extend that to local law enforcement, like you were saying, or maybe other people in someone's lives? For example, maybe a guidance counselor at a school where somebody expresses some concerning thoughts about harming themselves or others. Should they also be mandatory reporters, do you think?
Yeah, again, I think we want to be careful not to. It is a complicated thing if any person who might come in contact with a person experiences, has some suspicion that maybe the person causing harm to themselves or others, that would be a very wide range of people who would be mandated. I think law enforcement, again, this instance shows a school taking this seriously, right? They contacted police. If you are listening to this, this program, and you think somebody might be a danger to themselves and others, there are a number of things you can do. You can go straight to a court yourself. But the typical thing is to call law enforcement because they have the resources and the tools available to intervene right away. So I think that's a good place to put this responsibility.
Now, I do want to note that this is a deliberative process, as you said. This isn't just somebody files an extreme risk protection order and then, in 20 minutes, the police are at someone's door. It is a deliberative process with a judge. What do you think that says about how we can move forward with this without making people fearful of losing their right in the Second Amendment, without making people feel like the government is, quote, going to take away their guns? Because as you and I both know, the more we talk about this, the more that kind of rhetoric is going to come out.
It is. So this is the key thing is this is an evidence-based process. You can, in some case, get an order very quickly, but it is temporary. So if you have evidence that somebody's likely to harm themselves or others, you can go to a court, or the police can go to a court without necessarily bringing the person in, like notifying them that this process is going to go on, and get a temporary order. And that can be issued almost immediately. And then the police are notified, and then they can take whatever steps are necessary to make sure the person is not armed. But very quickly thereafter, the person has due process. They have a right to a very prompt hearing to contest that and to present evidence of their own. If that evidence is at that stage, the judge is still persuaded that this person, that the evidence is there and the person is a danger, then they can issue order for up to a year. The process is entirely civil process. There's no criminal implications of this. If the order expires and is not renewed, it is sealed. This is intended to be a law that somebody might take advantage of who actually cares about somebody and their well-being. And this is obviously applicable in instances where mass shootings and other horrific actions are the concern, but it's also applicable where suicide is the concern. So we're not trying to stigmatize people. We're not trying to deny people their constitutional rights. We are trying to make sure that when there is evidence that somebody is likely to harm themselves or others, that they don't have access to guns to do that.
Now let's talk about a few other proposals that are being floated. Governor Kathy Hochul this week threw her support behind a package of bills on gun control in New York, or gun restrictions, I should say. So I want to start with the first one that jumped out at me. She is supporting microstamping, which is exactly what it sounds like, basically putting an ID on ammunition to link it to a gun. Now, this idea has been in the legislature for a number of years without enough support to pass. So can you talk about what that is and how do you get it across the finish line before you leave for the year in early June?
Yeah, it's been microstamping again. It stamps a unique identifying, usually an alphanumeric number code on a shell casing. So it is, we've all heard about ballistics, and probably people out there watch CSI, and they look at like matching the bullet that might have been lodged somewhere to a gun, and that is a technology that's important, but it is very inexact. Very often, police find shell casings at the scene of a crime. If the shell casing has a number that is a unique identifier printed on it, they should be able to track that shell casing back to the initial purchase of that gun. Now, of course, the gun may have changed hands since then. It may have been sold into the illegal market. But having that kind of access is a basic way to solve serious crimes. It is cheap, it is effective, and it is time to implement it in New York. And again, we've had pushes to do this in the past. And, I think this is the time to get it done, and I think we will.
I hate to talk about politics as part of this, but in the past, there just hasn't been the political will for some people to sign on to these gun-related measures because they may be in swing districts where some voters may not like them so much. How do you bring that political will to Albany to get these things done before you leave?
We have, in New York, over the course of many years now, proved an ability to pass really significant gun violence prevention legislation. It is partisan, unfortunately. I have worked with Republicans on this to the extent they are willing and able, both in New York and nationally. But I think we've demonstrated the will in New York, and I think we'll continue to do so. And I think the governor stepping in with her leadership on this is a really important step. So I think we're going to move forward now with a series of important life-saving legislation.
All right, State Senator Brian Cavanagh, founder and chair of American State Legislators for Gun Violence Prevention. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much for having me and for focusing on this.